Hello fellow artists, I'm Haze Long and today I'm introducing you to my latest creation, the Noise Brush Pack. We are going to use these brushes to paint a portrait that is all about softness and light. So join me as we navigate through the layers to add a touch of romance to our artwork. These brushes are available now and you can also find a demo of these brushes in the channel and in the link in the description below. And now, let's get started. So I'll usually start by dropping a color in for the background and then roughly just picking some colors to shade the background a little bit, and I'll usually use the Nickel Roll brush for this. I'll also take the opportunity to shade the figure a little bit just to give it a base. Then I'll create a new layer, and then on this new layer I'm going to paint a red underpainting for the figure. After that, I'll just hide this layer and create a new layer. Using the fat medium brush, I'm going to quickly base in all the pink flowers. Once I'm done, I'm going to turn on mask for this layer, and using the eraser tool with Nickel Roll loaded in, I am going to carve out all the shapes for these flowers. Alternatively, after using the eraser, you can use the smudge tool with the same brush and then push the shapes around as well. Once I'm done carving the shape, I'm going to load the natural sketch and smudge brush into the brush tool, and then we are going to load white and we're going to paint in the shapes that are missing, so like leaves and then branches. Once I'm done, I'm going to end up with something like this. So this is just a rough silhouette of the pink flowers, and then right now I'm just going to duplicate this layer together along with the mask. And I'm going to lock the alpha, and I'm going to drop a darker shade of red to this new layer. I'm doing this to save time so that I don't have to paint everything again and again. Now I make sure to select my mask for this new layer, and I'm going to use the eraser to carve out the shapes for these shadows. I can also load the round brush into my brush tool, and using white I can paint in some petals as well. Here, just by using the natural sketch and smudge in my eraser tool, I can quickly carve out some petals in this flower. I can also use fat medium in the eraser tool to also carve out some soft shape in this flower as well. Using these techniques with the eraser, smudge and brush tool, I can quickly shade and model the shapes of the flowers, but I usually would like to use the fat medium brush in the eraser tool to softly erase the shapes so that I can give like a gradient to the finishing. I'm actually hosting a giveaway right now in my website, so to join this giveaway, all you have to do is submit your email into this mailing list right here. In 3 days, I will announce 5 winners that will receive the premium Noise Brush Pack. If you're curious about how mask works, you can subscribe to my channel, and I will have an upcoming video describing in detail all the techniques that are required and recommended for this new brush pack. When I was making this brush pack, I was at that time very inspired by artwork with a variety of noise textures. So I wanted to create a brush pack that would ease myself and other artists into it. So in order to achieve that, I needed to change my workflow as well, and I started experimenting with different workflows and how I can create the effects that I want. And then after that, I ended up with a lot of artworks using the same workflow, but they all came out differently. So back to the tutorial, this is what I have after 2 layers. I'm going to create another layer and start with another set of foliage in a different color. So this natural sketch and smudge brush is actually a common brush among my brush sets. If you get any of my brush sets, you can actually have this brush. I love using this brush because if you press harder, it will just respond and be thicker, and if you slowly release softly, you can get a sharp tip. Most of my sketch brushes have the same effect, so you should actually practice with this brush in order to save you time in your work, because you don't have to sketch and color in everything one by one. you can just use pressure and paint them instead. So I have simultaneously created 3 purple layers of foliage here, and then we are just going to turn on the alpha lock for each of them and recolor them to change the colors a little bit. So this workflow really hinges on this change, which is working on the shape first and getting the shape done and then worrying about the colors and the values later. Because we should place priority on the shapes, especially the edges, like how sharp each edge could be or how soft they are, and we can adjust those first before worrying about the values and colors. Here I'm using the fat fine brush to do the erasing for the top layer. This is actually a very simple illustration with very simple values and colors that is inspired by risograph, a method of printing. The colors just transition from gray to purple with value transitions between them. So now I'm just going to duplicate the top layer and then set it to multiply mode. Then I'm just going to use mask on this layer to create like an overlay effect between the leaves. Just like so, we're going to make the areas where they overlap a little bit darker. And then now we're going to change to the angled shader brush and just lightly shade the edge of some leaves. At the same time, we can take advantage and sketch some new leaves as well. Now that I'm done with all the foliage, I'm just going to group them all into one group and rename it foliage. Then I'm going to create another layer, and using the fat medium brush, I'm going to quickly block in some gradients for the clothes. Just as the same before, I'm going to duplicate this layer once the shade is ready. Then I'm going to turn on alpha lock, and using the fat nebula brush, I'm going to just shade this layer one shade darker. Then we're going to go ahead and activate the layer mask and invert it. Using white on a brush, I'm just going to use the natural and sketch smudge brush to paint in some shadow shapes for the clothes. I can also use the eraser tool to erase away some of the shapes to create like a gradient. Then I'm going to open layers and pick the layer instead of the mask. I'm going to use the lasso tool to select some of the shapes and darken certain areas for these shapes. I can also add in new shapes on a new layer, and I'll just merge them down once I'm done. Now I'm going to duplicate the first layer and drag it to the top and turn this to screen mode. So this will be our highlights layer, and I will just activate the mask and invert it. Now I'm going to use a noisy sketch and smudge brush to paint in some highlights by making sure I have white loaded in as my color. So when I'm doing this, I'm making sure that I paint in sweeping motions to ensure that there's a flow in my brush strokes. Now I'm going to switch to the angled shader brush. This brush is great for redefining edges. Now that the clothes is done, I'm going to create a new layer for the portrait. I'm just going to use purple to block in the shape of the face and just carve it up nicely first. And then you guessed it, I'm going to turn on alpha lock and pick some skin tone colors, drop it in, and then blend and shade a little bit more all over the face according to the zones. So if you see here, I have like a mid-tone going on, and I'm very careful to keep painting in different colors but the same value. Once I'm done, I'm going to create a duplicate of this layer so that I can keep layering values. So this one is going to be a little bit darker. So I'm just going to roughly paint in some reds that is about 1 or 2 shades darker, and then we will carve it out. You can see here as I am blocking in the colors, I'm more concerned about their location than their shape right now, because we are just painting them on for the location and we will worry about the shape later on. When we are ready to carve, I'm just gonna turn on mask for this second layer, and of course we're gonna use both the eraser and also the smudge tool with various brushes loaded in order to carve out the shapes. So when I talk about carving, I'm usually just defining which edge is sharper and which edge is softer, and then we will work from there. This method of painting allows us to have a shape with different types of edges for all around. So some edge have soft edges, and then some are sharp, and some have different textures, and it's possible because of this workflow. But the guiding principle is still the same: remain one value for each layer, and then we will just keep layering from light to dark or dark to light. This way you can experiment with different colors, because every layer is kind of transparent, because you can control the transparency with the mask, and you can just keep experimenting and testing out different colors as you go along. For my next layer, instead of creating another shadow layer, I'm going to create a layer just to touch up what I have below, so I can just pick colors and repaint some parts before I proceed to the next value. As I've mentioned before, my upcoming tutorial, which will be called 10 techniques for this workflow, you can actually have short tutorials of how to pick colors and how to intuitively use colors in your painting, if for those of you who have issues with picking colors and finding out color schemes that is suitable for you. So at any time, I can create a new layer, which is what I did now, and then start adding in darker values, but I always maintain with one value for one layer and I don't mix them up. Let's talk about the quality of edges. For example, if you see this shape here, the bottom edge is sharp and the top edges are blurred. So you can have different qualities for each of your edge to suit the style of your painting. So you can see here I have some layers going on already, and every time I would just merge them in order to keep things neat. So now I'm starting with a new layer, and this will be my new shadow layer. So I'm just painting with green first so that I can get all the shapes correct before I adjust the values and the colors. Here I'm worrying a lot about what kind of brushes I'm using, how is the quality of the edge, and how big the size of my brushes is gonna be. So all the textures and all the sizing issues are what I'm worrying about right now. So the downside of this workflow is that because it utilizes multiple layers, if you do not plan for repetitive shapes to be recycled over your layers, you might end up painting the same shapes again and again. And then when they overlay, they don't really match very well with each other, which may cause a stylistic emergence of thing to happen, or it might just makes you annoyed. So it's one or the other. But for me, I mostly recycle my shapes very well over my layers in order to save work, but this is what you have to bear in mind. Also, because you're layering so often, you might just get lost in the process of layering shapes, that everything just start to look pretty flat. So make sure you alternate between sketching, drawing, using gradients with soft brushes, and then carving and smudging as well, in order to keep your painting smooth and flowing. When I'm ready, I switch to the multiply blend mode to activate the shadows for this layer, and then I am going to just recolor it with something from my color palette and see how it looks like first. So once I see what I have on my screen, I can decide the color and if it's dark enough. So now I would just slowly readjust each color for each shape. And then you can see here I'm using the color picker to adjust the colors and the chroma that I'm picking. So I will cover this more in detail in the upcoming tutorial. But for now, because you can already see shadows on the painting, you can actually decide if you want them more vibrant and what color and how dark you want them to be. So that's 3 components that you have to think about once you are going to adjust the value and the hue and the chroma. Also, because the color scheme for this painting is very simplistic, and the slider, I'm only going from blue to purple and to red. I'm not going over to the yellows or the greens, so this helped a lot. So now I want you to take a look at my layers for the multiply mode one, and you can see how light the shadows are. So currently I'm on a new layer and I'm painting some cold shadows. So we have the reds which are warm, and we are working with purples and blues for the cold shadows. So the cold shadows usually are in grays, but for this portrait itself it's gonna be in blues and purples. So the simplest way to look at this is that the base color is skin tone, and then we have reds where the blood are usually at, which is the nose, the lips, and the eyes and the cheeks. Then we have the cold shadows and the cold colors in areas where there is less light hitting on it. Once I feel that there's nothing more to be done, I have usually another layer and I will start stacking darker shadows. At the moment, I'm starting to group shadows together by their color, so I'm just gonna change it to blue first temporarily, and then after that worry about this bunch of shapes. I want you to see very carefully where are all the blue shapes right now. You can see that they are all planes that are facing down towards the ground. So these are areas that the sunlight are not gonna hit, which are from the top. When I'm ready, I'm just going to turn on alpha lock or use the mask, and then I'm going to start switching the colors and the chroma and see what I have to adjust. Again, you can see how bright these shadow colors are. So they are very subtle and very bright. Right now, I'm just putting in some color changes for details, like in between the brows and in between the brow bones, and just tiny areas like that, just to give some complexity to the portrait. For the eyes, I'm just going to create a new layer and then change it to the color blending mode and just color in a gray, which is typically just some purple in my palette, and this would be my eyes. So right now I wanted to just block in the hair first before I continue with the portrait. Because I've explained most of the techniques already, I'm just going to explain more about the philosophy of this workflow from this point onwards. So for the hair, I actually intended for it to be black, but because of this neon green that is actually my placeholder color, I actually decided to change the color of the hair to neon green. But this would actually change the color scheme of the portrait, because if you look at the portrait, all the bounce colors are in purple, but because my hair is green, I would have to change some of those shadows to be green instead. Okay, so this is how it looks like once the first hair shape is done, and I'm just going to continue detailing the portrait and finish it up before we go back to the hair. Even with the details, I am blocking in the shapes first and the lines before I fix the colors and change the values. So I would usually do that using alpha lock or mask, and you can actually find out the difference between the two of them in my upcoming tutorial. So this portrait is fairly easy. For the darker tones, it's just muted grayed out colors of reds and purples, or in between them. So this is what we call the analogous color scheme, which means the colors are very harmonious because they're right next to each other. So it's the red and purple and blue, they are all next to each other. When it comes to the contrast of the painting, it's really up to you. I like to maintain a low contrast for this style. Like you see here, the blacks that I'm using are not pure black. So I like to do this because it gives a more softer and out of focus feeling to the portrait. Here I'm adding a coloring layer, so I'm just going to color in a shape and adjust the shape first before changing the blending mode. So for coloring, I usually use overlay or color blending mode. I use color if I just want to change the color, and I use overlay if I want a more dramatic effect, because the color change would affect the values a little bit and it looks more intense as well. At this point, it's easier to see what I missed, so I'm stacking a lot of effects layers. So I'm stacking in shadows, I'm stacking in color changes, I'm stacking in highlights in order to just complete the portrait. For highlights, I create a layer with the color dodge blending mode, and you can see here I'm actually using quite a saturated and dark color for the highlights. Don't use bright colors, it would just make your painting look chalky. So try to use vibrant and dark colors when you're using this method. I'm just blocking it in and then smudging it to get a soft effect. Then after that, I would concentrate on the center of the highlights and put in some dots to symbolize a glow. Remember to always make your highlight shape look different from one another. They shouldn't be too big and they shouldn't be pure white. They should have a variety of colors and texture changes in between them. The more complex you make each highlight shape and the more textures you infuse in them, the more natural and realistic it will look. It's really easy to go overboard, so please be mindful about that and don't keep painting highlights all over the face. Alternatively, you can also use the highlight speckle brush. So for this brush, make sure you're on a new layer. Pick the color of where you want to paint the highlights. And if you softly paint on those areas, you can see that speckles will just start to appear. Then when you're done, just merge down. Looking pretty complete, but I'm going to duplicate the portrait one more time and set it to screen for highlights layer. And I'm going to invert the mask and softly just shade in some highlights here and there. So I'm using the Fat Fine brush so that I have really smooth gradients. The portrait's done, so I'm just going to merge it and then we're going to work on the hair right now. So we'll just drop in colors to recolor first for the base, and we are going to just duplicate this base layer one more time. So these new layers will be shadow, and I'm dropping in darker colors, and then I'm just going to carve out the shapes for these layers. I'm just erasing certain parts of this layer to reveal highlights from the layer underneath. Then we are just going to smudge this layer so that we can give a flow for the hair. As far as brushes go, you can start with any brush, but once you're ready and you have done carving out the shapes, you can detail them using the natural sketch smudge or the noisy sketch and smudge brush to add in the strands of hair. You don't have to do this all over the hair, so you can just work on areas where the light are hitting them. If you want a more interesting texture when you're working on hair, you can use the round brush or the bristle brush, which is right at the bottom of this brush pack. So these brushes are meant to be used at the end of the painting so that you can just add in effects. So now that I have two shapes going on, I can adjust the colors and the value for each of these shapes, but I'm keeping them fairly simple because neon colors are so glowy and bright that if you put in too many details, it can be pretty difficult to look at them. I think this is what people call semi-realistic illustration because it's not an illustration and also not a realistic painting, but they are kind of in between. So the way to achieve this is to maintain the value changes, reduce the complexity of the painting, and then for the colors and the chroma, we can just use our creativity for it. And for light effects as well, so in this new layer, it's going to be in overlay blending mode, and we're just going to put in some light streaks and let them hang in here. So now all the drop shadows in between the hair and the face have to be changed from purple to green, because this is what will happen. Realistically, the color would just bounce onto the skin in this color. So I'm adjusting it to be something like a pale yellow instead of green. You don't want pure green, it's going to be too obvious. And lastly, I'm going to move the underpainting that I've painted in the beginning of this tutorial all the way up, and using the angled brush, I'm just going to quickly sketch in some lines to signify like bleeding of the underpainting. So it's not going to be every line and every sketch, it's just here and there, and I'm just seeing which drawing that I want to redefine. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!